Hi, so for my paper presentation, I was looking at a research article that was called The Reactivation of Single Episode Pain Patterns in the Hippocampus and Decision Making. And the researchers here were more broadly looking at ideas of learning and decision making regarding past experiences. But the targeted research question that was asked was whether a single aversive episode could influence memory based decision making, and if this is impacted by the reactivation of patterns of pain related activity in the hippocampus or other regions of the brain responsible for pain related response. So, kind of like, um, how can we recognize painful stimulus that are associated with painful experiences, and how can we change our behaviors around these types of stimulus to avoid painful experiences repeating themselves? So this happened in three phases: an incidental learning phase, a behavioral choice test phase, and an fMRI memory test phase. In the incidental learning phase, participants were shown a visual cue that said you're about to experience a low or a high heat, and then there was a 4-second interval, and they were shown an object for 10 seconds as a visual stimulus. And this visual stimulus was largely food items, easily recognizable things like watermelon on a cue card. And then they were allowed another 4-second interval, and then there was the heat exposure phase, and the heat that was applied was either 39.5 degrees Celsius to 49.5 degrees Celsius. Something super hot, but definitely enough to make the participant kind of like realize it was painful. And then after the heat exposure, they were asked to rate their pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And then after the incidental phase was the behavioral choice test phase, where a surprise choice followed that first phase, where they were asked to select an object out of three total options and associate it with the low heat. So, of those three options, one image would have been associated with low heat in the incidental learning phase, one would have been associated with high heat in that first phase, and then a third image would be completely new. So, they'd be shown each of these images and then asked to rate which one was associated with the low pain, and then also to say how confident they were in their guesses. And participants were pretty easily able to correctly identify the high pain image, but they weren't as easily able to identify the low pain image. They were more likely to get the low pain image confused with a new image. And then in the fMRI memory test phase, this occurred inside an fMRI scanner, and participants were asked to assess their pain experience after being shown an object from that original phase. So they were shown 86 total images, 20 of which were completely new, they'd never seen before, and 66 of which were from that original test phase that they were exposed to with a heat stimulus. So participants would be shown an object for 5 seconds, and then there'd be a 1 second interval, and they'd be asked to remember the pain, and then they were asked to say how confident they were in that response. And then they were also asked whether they were certain if it was a new or an old image. And what they found from this experiment was that 69% of the old images were correctly rated. So people were able to identify previously painful stimuli from that original test phase. And in the fMRI part of the study, the hippocampus showed significant evidence for the reactivation of pain-related patterns when they were exposed to previously injurious images. So when they were shown images associated with a high pain rating, the hippocampus showed a lot of activity. And so this kind of shows that one single aversive experience can guide later decision making, um, and that patterns in the hippocampus from the original experience kind of like play into this. And so the hippocampus, then we can kind of determine, has a role in the association of episodic experience with negative values. So if we remember the value of negative episodes, this can be pretty important because it can help us avoid the repetition of like painful experiences. So like if we know that a stimulus is associated with something that might cause us harm, then keeps us from repeatedly hurting ourselves. And this can have practical applications in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and other mood disorders. And so this can kind of inform a little bit more so about post-traumatic stress disorder, because it shows that there are regions of the brain, namely the hippocampus, that respond to imagery surrounding painful experiences. So we can use this to help identify triggers in people with PTSD. And then if we can like identify these triggers, can we keep people from responding really aggressively to potential triggers from previously injurious events? And like, can we eventually find ways to eradicate that association with the stimulus as negative at all. So, like, can we completely eradicate a specific trigger for a person with PTSD? Um, and yeah, that's basically like what I have for you. And thanks.